I'd like to welcome everybody to Trend Micro's Managing Family Life Online as you stay at home. This is the 5th in our weekly series, and today we'll be talking about dealing with screen time challenges. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Dr. Michael Rich. Hi, Dr. Rich.
Hello.
Dr. Rich is the founder of and director of the Center on Media and Child Health as part of Boston Children's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and is also, I think, goes by another title, and that is the Mediatrician, which I think is an absolute fantastic name. And so before we get started, I just want to remind the audience that at any time, you are welcome to submit questions to Dr. Rich using the Q&A feature on your screens. And you will be kept anonymous, so no judgment here whatsoever. Feel free to ask whatever's on your mind. I'd also like to remind the audience that we, as part of Trend Micro's Internet Safety for Kids and Families program, who is the host of this series, we quickly had to change from the work we do face-to-face in communities to offering a lot of options online, and we're really honored to be joined today by our esteemed guest to talk about something that I think is really, it's been troubling a lot of people. Obviously, we were thrown into this situation by a pandemic, and even though for some people, we've been in the situation that we've been in for, I don't know, maybe 8, 10, 12 weeks, depending on where you live. I still think that people are trying to grasp how to handle screen time in particular, and how to help our kids manage their relationships with media and with the internet and with technology. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we get started, we'd like to do a poll for all of you dialing in right now, and there's absolutely no judgment whatsoever. No one will know who you are when you answer. And the question is this. Oops. How many hours a day are your kids on screens? So using the polling function, you'll be able to go ahead and make your selection. How many hours per day are your kids on screens? And you know, again, I don't think you need to feel badly. Just answer truthfully. I will have to say, as we were talking earlier, Dr. Rich, if I could answer this, I'd probably say D.
As would I.
Say D, as would you, yes. And in my case, I've got a 13 and a 16-year-old, so they're largely, you know, they're pretty self-sufficient. They're pretty self-directed, I hope, I think. Okay, great. So it looks like we're at this, the highest numbers of you, 44% of you actually said 6+ hours, and 41% saying 2 to 6 hours. And so that's, you know, no judgment. Thank you for being honest about that. Dr. Rich,
yes.
Any comments on this 6+ hours?
I think that that's a very realistic and honest response for a lot of parents, you know, and I would in some ways lump the D, I have no idea in there too, because I think that we have no idea because they're on screens more or less constantly when they are awake, even if it's a screen in their pocket that they are walking around with, they feel constantly connected. So I think that, you know, this is an interesting look at it. I do think, though, that we should note that in this day and age, the concept of screen time limits, which were set during the age of television, are pretty much obsolete. There are screens everywhere we go. You know, you gas up at the gas station, you go to the supermarket, you know, our homes have multiple screens. We have them in our pockets, on our wrists. And so One of the things, interestingly, that we discovered back in the days when the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended 1 to 2 hours of quality educational screen time a day, which was, in that case, passive screens and television, was that it became the forbidden fruit. So if you limited your child to a certain number of hours, that's how many hours they immediately jumped onto the moment they came home. And at the end of that time, what happened? Absolutely nothing. So 15 minutes over, mom comes up or dad comes up and says, hey, you got homework to do this. Oh, I want to finish the program. I want to level up. And it becomes a conflict every single time. And so what we feel that the research has shown us, and actually in clinical experience, that the best way to think about screen time is to turn the paradigm upside down and to think with your child about their 24-hour day and fill up that empty glass of 24 hours with however many hours of sleep they need at this age. And teenagers need a lot of sleep. A sit-down family meal every day, which we've kind of moved away from, but is not only good for their nutrition, but good for their mental health. Strenuous activity, they like playing sports, they like hanging out with their friends, and then see what time is left. So instead of restricting screen time, have it be placed in their prioritization where it belongs, and then they will use it more mindfully. And when they own the plan with you, as opposed to having it imposed upon them, they're much more likely to adhere to it. And this is really about them learning to respect themselves, respect their attention, and where they pay their attention to, and not fall into the just see whatever's on because I can.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think I love the idea of empowering kids to be a part of the solution rather than them being told what to do all the time, because ultimately they're going to have to make these decisions on their own. And also, I think we can all put ourselves in their shoes. When we were kids, how did we feel when we were, forced to do something versus what do you think is an appropriate amount of time? What do you think is, when do you think you should put the screen down? Yeah, it would probably be, is it too late though? Like if you've already been sort of setting rules and then all of a sudden you come to them saying, you know what, let's talk about what you think. Would that still be effective regardless how you've been doing it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's sort of, we had this same situation when it was recommended that you take televisions out of kids' bedrooms, right? They're not going to love the idea, but, we're the parents. We set the rules. And in learning something new, we've discovered that the old way is not as good as the new way. And so if you can frame it as an advance, as a progression, rather than as a punishment, that works a whole lot better. And actually, one of the things that may come out of this lockdown that many of us are in that is a good thing is that, the kids are now doing classes on Zoom. They are communicating and having play dates with their friends only through screens. They are entertaining themselves. They're doing all of these things. And frankly, I think that this is an opportunity now to help kids shift their focus on the internet and on the screens as a playground and have them realize that this is actually a very powerful tool that is necessary to learn, to communicate, to connect. And frankly, the amount of hours they have to be on screen now for school, et cetera, I'm hoping that they'll sort of burn out on the screen as a playground and sort of say, I just want to go outside and throw a basketball around, or I just want to take a walk. I can't stand staring at a screen all day.
Yeah, well, that's my hope. And I think it's a question I've been wondering is that as different countries and different states in the United States start moving out of lockdown and reopening, what is that transition going to look like? Going into lockdown and telling your kids, oh, you're going to be on the internet a lot more. I mean, they were not necessarily crying about that, but now we're going to be moving in the other direction. Is there a way to transition that we should consider? Should we start weaning them now?
No, I think, well, that's one approach, but I think another approach might be that one of the things the pandemic has done has made us more mindful of everything that we took for granted before. More mindful about what it means to get together with friends, what it means to share a meal. And so I think that if we can bring that mindfulness to our use of screens, and use them in directed, focused ways, but also recognize that they're not a universal tool that's the best tool for everything. That this is a tool that can be applied for certain things well, but in other cases, it's way better to be in person. It's way better to be physical. It's way better to be outdoors. So I'm the perpetual optimist as a pediatrician. You know, I'm always looking at the glass half full. And I think the glass half full here is we're paying more attention to what we are spending our time on, who we are spending our time with, and what the outcome of that time is. Because in many ways, the empty staring at screens is not very productive. But now they're in a situation where they are needing to be productive, and hopefully we can help them learn to value that productivity. There
I actually was wondering on that note, since COVID-19, in your practice, is there anything different that you've noticed? I mean, is it that kids are just on the screens more, or is it what they're actually doing that's different, that is better or worse? What did you see change, if anything?
Well, a couple of things. You know, for a number of years now, we have been saying that the data are showing that it's not how many hours, it's not the duration of time you spend on screens, it's what you are using on those screens. What is the content and what is the context in which it's being used? So, you know, is the content really advancing things for me in terms of what I'm learning, in terms of my connectedness to the world, my awareness? But it's also when we choose to use it, you know, so you don't bring a smartphone to the dinner table. You know, you put these tools aside when you want to focus on something different. And that speaks to the other issue, which is the myth of multitasking. We believe that we can, you know, watch a video, do our homework, listen to music, and text with our friends at the same time. The reality is the human brain is one track. We can only think about one thing at a time. And what we are actually doing when we think we are multitasking is split tasking. We are jumping from thing to thing to thing, and back to the first thing. And one thing that research has shown is that kids at MIT and Stanford, arguably some of the smarter kids around, who were master multitaskers, actually did studies where they did homework alone and homework in various multitasking situations. And what they found was that the homework took longer, twice or more longer it took, that their mistake rate went up by 56%, and their retention rate, in other words, what they remembered from what they studied, dropped by 80%. And the reason why is that they were skating over the surface of ideas. They were covering a lot of territory, but they weren't thinking deeply and reflecting on the things that they were doing, and they certainly weren't retaining it.
So what would you recommend then? We really should just focus our time rather than do multiple things at once.
I think it's a matter of being planful, you know, knowing when to do, you know, I think especially in this lockdown time, one of the things that will help decrease some of the anxiety is having a strong schedule. Wake up at the same time you usually wake up, go to sleep at the same time, get enough sleep, get meals, because that not only makes sure that we get through the day, but it adds a sense of security in a situation that feels very insecure and very indefinite right now.
Yes.
So I think that's something also we can carry into the new normal, which is to recognize the value of routine, the the value of having a structure to our day, knowing where the sidelines on the playing field are. And, you know, kids will push back against it. They always have. But the kids I see in my practice who get in trouble with depression and anxiety, substance use problems, eating disorders, are the kids whose parents didn't give them very much structure and kind of let them be free range. And it makes them feel unmoored. It makes them feel unconnected. And that's one of the things I'm actually concerned about with our education system, which is, of course, you know, all over the map because we were not prepared for remote learning. But certainly at the beginning, many of the schools were saying this is optional because they didn't want kids to feel obligated, or this is pass fail. And of course, kids take advantage of that. But what also happens to them is what they're hearing from the school is, we don't care that much about what you do. It doesn't matter, right? And so they didn't have a sense of accountability, which also made them feel unmoored.
That's interesting because our district was like that, and I know that there was a lot of back and forth about why not. And I think the reasoning was also sound on the part of the administration, which was because we cannot provide an equitable learning platform right now, it seems unjust to thrust upon all of these kids some kind of expectations with grading. And so it was serving sort of the basics for everyone, but not really for the kids who needed maybe something else, right? And it's that feeling of value.
Yeah,
partly.
I mean, but I think the mistake that was made was, instead of solving the inequities, which we need to do long-term anyway, and would have to accelerate that, the solution was to lower everything to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So since
Yeah.
we can't give the excellence to everyone, we're going to give nothing to anyone.
Yeah, I think the thinking too was this is just short term. So, and it would not have been that case if we knew this was going to be our forever
Right.
reality. You know, I think on this note about how children's brains work, I'm definitely sometimes irritated, sometimes curious about how games, social networks, or anything on screens that our kids use. I'm very often wondering how much they're deliberately making them addictive. I mean, I'm a big fan of timed games. A game that actually has a beginning and an end, and not these games that can go on and on and on. If you reach a certain level, you literally could be playing forever. And these are where the battles begin. Even if you say 1 hour, they just reached a level though, Mom. You can't take it away from me now. I'm just about to reach that next level. So what are your thoughts about the responsibility of people who create the games, people who create the content online, and whether they're even good for kids or not? What are your thoughts on their responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back, first of all, to the schedule I was talking about, you know, because in a schedule, you have a start time and an end time, you know, a bedtime and a waking time. And that is important for games too. I think that the problem with games or social media or any of these interactive media are when you go into it with no end in sight, when you go into it and saying, I'm just going to do this, because they are all designed to draw you in and keep drawing you in, not just to draw you in and hold you in, but there's constant grabs. There's constant new ways of, you know, auto playing a video, or, you know, how many likes did I get? Or, you know, what level can I get to in this game? And yes, I believe that the game designers have a responsibility, but I don't think we should make them the bad guys. They are doing exactly what they plan to do, which is to create a product that's sold, right? And from a parent's side, where they say, is this addiction? They're saying engagement. You know, this is engagement. This is engaging our customers. This is giving our customers what they want and keeping our customers, you know, keeping them wanting the next level, keeping them, their eyeballs glued to the banner ads, et cetera. And so I think that what this leads to is the fact that I think we're making a mistake when we point fingers at game designers, at social media creators and stuff and say, you are hurting our children. This is a situation that we're all in together. We need to work together to create a better society in this digital realm. I think many of the original innovators have recognized that what they did in an attempt to create a good business model, which they did, is they lost control of the other side of the sword, and now they're sort of saying, oh my God, it's terrible. It's not terrible, it is what it is. But we need to roll up our sleeves together and work the problem. And this is actually something that we are developing at the Center on Media and Child Health is instead of having everybody in our own silos doing our own thing, can we create a big tent on top, built on an evidence base of data and work together with game designers, work together with device makers, work together with platform creators, and make it a more human and humane space. In other words, to create a second bottom line for them, which is not just profit,
Yep.
but is wellness of individuals and of society.
Absolutely. I think, well, that'll be exciting to hear whenever that kicks off. I'd love to hear more about that when it does. But I think also there are cases, and obviously you see some of these kids where there is a problem, and whether or not the game was, or the social media was the reason, there are signs that some of our kids start to develop an unhealthy relationship with technology, with media, with the internet. So, for the benefit of those of us who maybe don't know a lot about it, but maybe are worried about it, what are some of those signs that we should look out for, or things we should try and, cut off early if we're starting to see those behaviors?
Well, I should preface this by saying that not only have we been studying this for years, but for about 2.5 years now, we've had a formal clinic at Boston Children's Hospital, the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders, which goes by the wonderful acronym of SimAid. So it's aid for your simulated life. As I'm sure you're aware, there have been debates since the mid-90s about, is there such a thing as internet addiction or video game addiction, et cetera. And a couple of things we've realized from seeing the patients we've seen. First of all, addiction is both an inaccurate and unhelpful definition, because people immediately think of junkies or bums on Skid Row. They don't see their 10-year-old kid who is staying up too late at night to play a game or on social media or getting cyberbullied or cyberbullying. They don't see that as addiction, so they don't seek out help until the kid is way down the tubes, is in real situation of not getting up for school, dropping out of school, looking for all the world like they're depressed. So I think that effort to label it an addiction is good in terms of being a lightning rod, getting people's attention. But it is inaccurate because I think it keeps people from care until too late. The other thing that I think is wrong about addiction, as in if you relate it to heroin or tobacco or cocaine, is that the goal in treating an addiction is abstinence, is living without it. They can't live without interactive media. We see this as more akin to binge eating disorder, overuse of a necessary resource, continued overuse despite poor outcomes or negative responses to it. And our goal is not abstinence, but is self-regulation, is being able to use these tools in effective ways. The other thing that's been going on is that the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, or Mental Disorders, sorry, lists internet gaming disorder as an area to be studied further. The World Health Organization has named gaming disorder as a problem. What we are seeing is not just gaming. We are seeing kids who have problems with gaming, more prevalent in boys, with social media, more prevalent in girls, with pornography, interestingly, evenly balanced between the sexes, and with what we're calling information binging, which is sort of the endless YouTube videos, the endless Twitch videos, even things like Netflix. And so the other thing we're seeing is that we don't think that this is a diagnosis, but is actually a syndrome. Just as in the beginning of our understanding of HIV, we called it AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which is a collection of symptoms, but it was a while before we discovered the virus that was behind it. What we are seeing in these kids who come in real trouble with interactive media is that there is always an underlying psychological diagnosis that is driving these behaviors. So the kids who get in trouble with gaming often have one variation or another of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And if you think about it, it is somewhat like a substance use because, for example, people who become alcoholics or have problems with drugs often are starting off to self-medicate anxiety, something like that, and then they get caught up in the process. Mm-hmm. What kids with ADHD are doing with games is moving out of an environment that is often very chaotic and confusing to them because they are so distractible, so hypervigilant, and into an environment where being distractible and hypervigilant is an asset, where it's a space of relative mastery for them to play, you know, Call of Duty or Fortnite, where being aware of all these things going on. Whereas when they sit in a classroom and are supposed to listen to a teacher droning at the blackboard, they're all over the place. They can't do it. So they're entering a place where they are not only feeling comfortable, but where they have real skills, real mastery. Social media, a lot of kids who have social anxiety get into social media because it feels safer, it's arm's length, et cetera. And what they realize is, or they believe they realize is, everybody in the world is happier than they are, right? Everybody else has better vacations and nicer houses and hotter boyfriends. And so what we are seeing is that we're seeing the symptoms, the syndrome being a collection of symptoms, not the problem. And when we find the underlying problem and treat it, these problems go away.
That's okay. That's great. I mean, and I think that going back to what you said earlier on, if you help kids think about technology and their relationship with it as a glass to fill each day, of which some is comprised of sleep, eating, exercise, homework, time with family and friends, then all of a sudden they realize, oh, well, there's only this much left for screens.
Right.
So
here's what's going on. You're teaching them very early on to prioritize what they care about, and most especially to manage time. And God knows we could all be better at time management. And so this is something not only to teach your kids, but to model in ourselves, right? We need to be more mindful of the way we use screens and the way we use our smartphones, et cetera, because not only because it will make our lives better, but because kids hear only 1% of what we say to them, but 100% of what we do.
Well, on that note, and I've got to ask this because I work for a technology company, they've gotten better over the last decade. The features that people blanket call parental controls, finally Apple came out with Screentime as that feature in their own devices, but obviously that's not helpful for other devices. There are other kinds of parental controls in security software, parental controls in routers, parental controls in your service provider might provide that too. I feel like it's useful for a certain age group. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I don't think I could use it with my high school kid. She's ready to be on her own and manage her own time. But what are your thoughts on the use of those?
Well, here's an interesting thing. I sometimes can be kind of a gadfly to the industry. The industry, with all its best intentions, talks about internet safety. And I keep saying we should stop talking about internet safety because it presumes the internet is unsafe. We don't teach kids to drive a car, another powerful tool, by saying, don't run over people, don't hit that tree. You know, we teach them to drive. We teach them
Some
to
of us do, though.
master the experience, right? But in the process of mastering the experience, they don't hit the tree and they don't run over pedestrians. And that's taking a more positive approach to it, helping them master this tool and respect it in the process of mastering the tool. So I think that's very important. The other thing is, the other kind of terminology that I don't like is parental controls, because what kid in the world wants to be controlled by their parent, right? I prefer the concept of parental engagement. So can we design into these devices, into this software, into these platforms, ways in which parents can, with these tools, be the equivalent of sitting white-knuckled in the passenger side of the car when their child learns to drive the car? So can we build in the process of a parent teaching, mentoring, and being a resource to their child instead of being a cop? And I'll tell you an interesting anecdote that we've found with Apple Screentime, right? Put it there, what a great idea. It's fabulous. You can know exactly how much screen time and what you spend it on. Kids compete with screen time to see who can get more, right? So here's—
Oh, really? I thought it'd be the opposite.
Here's a tool made with all the best intentions that the kids have adopted in a new way. So we have to bring the human nature into this too. You know, look, I got 16 hours of gaming yesterday and you only got 14, right? So we have to bring the concept of human behavior, and particularly of human behavior among kids who will not have a fully functional prefrontal cortex until they're 25, 28 years old, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, I want to just pause for a minute to share with the audience two things. Number one, we're going to open it up for questions in a second, but I want to share a resource that Dr. Rich, you were kind enough to share with us in advance. It's actually launching tomorrow on your website from what we discussed. And it actually, if you could describe this is, I think it's a very, very useful tool. I'll let you talk a little bit about this family digital wellness guide.
Yes, as a pediatrician and a child health researcher, I wanted to bring science to bear on this. I don't need to tell anybody that there are a lot of opinions that range from turn it all off to embrace it, it's the future, and everything in between. Unfortunately, for the last 50 years or so, starting with television, we've had a values-based approach to this. You know, they talk about the boob tube or the idiot box. And what we want to do is bring the same kind of science, the same rigor to this issue of what media we consume, as we do with nutrition science to what we consume in our bodies. And so what the Family Digital Wellness Guide does is takes a huge body of science created by us and researchers around the world and translates it into practical action steps that parents can take. It's divided down into different age groups. So it's infants and toddlers, preschoolers, school age, tweens, and teens. And in each area, we talk about what's going on for them developmentally, how media is used by them and at that stage and how it can affect them. And then a series of various issues of that age group. For example, as you see in the center here, educational apps, how to use them, and bringing the science down to a solid, accessible action step for parents, much the way a pediatrician does when you go in with your child and they talk about nutrition, they talk about seat belts, they talk about bicycle helmets, and a couple of nice features, because this is an area that's fraught with tension for the parents. In fact, I've had any number of parents tell me they'd much prefer to have the sex talk with their kids than the internet talk, because they think that they know something about sex. They feel clueless about the internet. So we've created something you'll see on the right side of your screen called Icebreakers, which is how to approach some of these difficult problems without it becoming a fight, without it becoming a stomp off and leave. Because what we want to do is be supporters of our kids' success, not police of their behaviors. Because as soon as we start policing and restricting, they start subverting and hacking around it. And I hate to tell you, they're smarter than we are. And so we want to stay on the same side with them and be supporters and nurturers, not the cops.
Well, this is great. Yeah, I actually reviewed the entire document, and for everybody on the listening and watching today, you will find this on CMCH, which stands for the Center on Media and Child Health.tv. That'll be live tomorrow, so you're getting a sneak peek of this before it's actually available to the public. So I encourage everybody to take a look at that. And I do like the icebreakers, because I was sort of chuckling and saying, oh, that's an interesting, tough conversation I found myself in and need. I wish I had this guide, because that would have been a good way to broach the conversation. So for now, I'd like to, again, if you're just joining us, feel free to log your questions in using the Q&A feature on your screen. There's just a comment here, Dr. Rich, from someone who says, my big frustration is that our children, which are twins, 5-year-old twins, don't have an urge to go outside and play, because on TV, everything, all the creativity they can find outside, it is already on the screen. What are your thoughts on that?
What we have to do is present things like going outside as a better alternative. Instead of saying, turn it off, go find something to do, develop games with them. The fact of the matter is that no 5-year-old on this earth has a body that wants to sit still and be a couch potato. They need to move. And what we can do is set up their screen experiences at a timing that is in consistency with their attention span, and then have an alternative activity waiting for them on the other side. 5-year-olds love to run around. So, they watch, a show and then go outside and play hide and seek, or, they watch a soccer game and go out and kick a ball around. So what we owe our kids in the long run is a rich and diverse menu of experience, which can include screens, but shouldn't be exclusively screens. And frankly, our job as parents is not to be their BFF or to, make them happy at all costs, but is to really give them that rich and diverse menu of experience, because ultimately what they're learning to do is be human. And while you can learn a lot of that from a screen, there's a lot that you cannot learn from a screen. Learning how to read people's faces and emotions, learning how to climb a tree. All of these things are part of childhood, and we don't want to deny them that. So instead of saying, turn that off, we say, turn something else on.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it, actually. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this one. The concept of earning screen time, the fun screen time versus the screen time I have to use for school and for in lockdown, the screen time to just connect with family and friends is not equal to the mindless entertainment kind of screen time, right?
Right.
But yeah, your thoughts on earning, like going outside to play, or helping a chore in the house, or doing something else productive that doesn't involve screens, and then earning screen time. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't think it's a good idea, and I'll tell
Okay.
you why. It's for the same reason that making allowance contingent on doing your chores is not a good thing, right? There are certain obligations we have as members of a family and as members of a society, frankly. And we also have certain expectations. And one of those expectations is you get allowance every week. But the expectation is also that you will do your chores, but they're not linked together. They're not part of the same thing. They're not a quid pro quo so much as they are part of what you do. And the reason for not doing it with fun screen time is that when you make it either a reward for good behavior or a punishment in its removal for bad behavior, you are creating that forbidden fruit thing. You're making it chocolate cake. You're making it something that kids want, and they will subvert the system. They're smart enough to do that. But if you say, look, this is part of life, you know, our expectation rather than our rule is that you will get your homework done. You will get some play outside. You will do chores. But I'm not going to punish you by taking away your screens if you don't do that. With one exception, is that is when they misuse the screen itself. When they either are not getting to bed on time or not doing their homework or going to sites that are, you know, not so great for them. But we then approach that as a problem to solve, as a redirection to make, and keep that isolated to that. And sometimes, yes, you know, if a kid is, you know, gaming 16 hours a day, sometimes they just need to put it aside and lower their level of hyperstimulation so they can do a reset in their lives.
Okay, and we have a comment here. My 11-year-old is badly affected by a lot of gaming time. He becomes obsessed with the games, and it affects his anger, his social skills, his school performance, and basically everything. So how do I limit his screen time while my other child, my 14-year-old, whom he compares himself to, and questions come up of why does the older one not have any limits, but the younger one is being asked to have limits? How do you navigate that when you have two kids who behave very differently with their relationships in the same house?
This has been a problem from time immemorial. I mean, what happens if you have a 14-year-old playing a violent video game and a 2-year-old sitting next to him on the couch, right? I think first of all, every kid is different. We as parents know our kids better than anybody else. And what we should always be striving toward is, how can I help my child be healthy, happy, and a good citizen? How do we help them be smart and kind in a world full of screens? And, you know, the 14-year-old and the 11-year-old are very different kids. And they hate being lumped into, you know, one size fits all as much as they want it. The 11-year-old is going to push for what he or she perceives the 14-year-old is getting, not because they want to be like that 14-year-old, but because they want to have all the goodies, right? So a step back would be to really sit down with the 11-year-old and say, let's look at the big picture. Let's look at what's going on in school. Let's look at what's going on, you know, with the family. Are you fighting more? You know, are you happy? And let's also look at what happens when they have to stop gaming, because oftentimes that's where the flash point is. That's where it blows up. And so, you know, to help the child become conscious, become mindful of the way he or she is behaving, and saying, you know, you don't act like you're happy. You don't act like you're comfortable in your own skin after you've spent 4 hours playing video games. Why don't we think through how that may be affecting you? Now, obviously, their initial stance is going to be, you don't understand this, you know, I love this. You know, so it's going to be a gradual and incremental process. But the more that we can help the kids become conscious of how they are behaving, how they are feeling when they're behaving that way, how they make other people feel, is really the goal. And frankly, the whole process of parenting is one of going from 100% control and discipline of the child to transferring that control and discipline to within the child at the, you know, as they become adults. And it isn't going to be an overnight process, and all children are not different. But one of the things that this parent can say to the 11-year-old is, how does your 14-year-old sibling look compared to you? Right? That, you know, your sibling does play video games, but maybe he turns it off after an hour and a half. and maybe he goes to do other things. And how can we get you to that place so that you can move seamlessly between the various arenas of your life? These kids naturally, I mean, they don't think of online and offline. We think of that. We're old people. We think of online life and offline life. For them, it's one seamless thing. And how can we help them navigate that seamless environment in a way that is thoughtful and directed, and where they are seeking out what they want? The other thing actually one can do with video games is help these kids become aware of how they are being manipulated, how they are getting sucked in. As you say, quite intentionally by the game designers. But the game designers are following the rubric of, how do I get more people to play this game for longer? That's their business.
I think that's a really good point, because we find that in our work when we talk to kids about social media and what's happening with their data and how it's being collected and used, it all of a sudden awakens something in them of, wait a minute, I don't have control over that. That really makes me makes me angry. So I like that point of, you know, what part are you not in control of? What are you giving up to these game developers? What do you think they're trying to do to you? I think that's a great,
well, it's not only
in an age appropriate way, I suppose.
Of course. And, you know, and it's an ongoing process. Not only do they not have control over their personal data, they don't have control over themselves. You know, when they are flipping out, when they have to stop playing a game or get off social media.
Absolutely.
And in fact, that was the secret finally to dealing with smoking, was teaching kids not that it was harmful to them, because kids are going to live forever. They can't conceive of the fact that they can't walk on water and they're not bulletproof, right? They're just living an endless life. But when it became obvious to them that someone somewhere was manipulating them into being addicted to a substance that was putting money in some guy's pocket somewhere, and when it wasn't when it was dangerous, because dangerous was kind of sexy, it was when it was stupid, you know, that we turned the corner with cigarettes. Now, of course, we have to deal with vaping the same way, you know, because vaping is cool now.
Yeah, until it's not.
Right. Well,
we have time for.
I'll do everything to make it not cool. Frankly.
We have time for one more here. We've got one question that, and then we're going to wrap it up. The comment here is, I have a son who's on classes all day long on Zoom, has to do a science project using Minecraft. He reads books on a Kindle. He has to watch documentaries online for history class. Wants to be outside as well, and then when it's time for fun, he wants to be on the Xbox. Something that he could actually manage for 30 minutes when he was in school, but now that he's home, this is feeling like it's feeling too much, and it's actually looks like it's hurting his eyesight as well. So any advice on how to manage? It sounds like a lot of that is not optional. He's got to do it. So any advice on how to manage all of that screen time in his eyes?
Well, I think, I think, first of all, there is a fair amount of data showing that not only does the blue light of the screen affect their melatonin suppression, so it keeps them up later, longer, so they don't get into sleep as well, nor do they have the quality of sleep they would, but also that it may have some long-term effects on our retinas, that it may actually damage our eyes over time. I think this is again about being mindful and conscious of how he feels. You know, in many ways, you know, a Zoom classroom is hard work, you know. So it's important to build in, get up, move around, stretch, get something to drink, get something to eat, and then do the next thing. And I think that can then extend to other things, you know, and so, you know, this parent says, you know, the child does like to be active, does like to get outside. So that's where building the schedule with them is really helpful, because you can say, let's plan it in. Let's plan it in. Let's put all your interests together into a 24-hour day that is healthy and good for you and is diverse, so that you have many different experiences, not just to broaden your experience, but also to give you a break from, sort of a single experience. We can't do 24 hours of math class, and we can't do 24 hours of Call of Duty.
Absolutely. And Dr. Rich, I want to thank you again so much. We had other questions coming in, but what we're going to do is we'll thank you to the people who've submitted them. We'll try to compile them and get answers to you after today's session. I do want to draw everybody's attention to our next week's session. We hope you will join us. We're actually going to be talking about gaming, interestingly enough. And specifically, the week after that, we're actually going to have somebody from Microsoft Xbox joining us on June 3rd. The next week, we're actually going to talk a little bit about some of the most popular games and things you should be aware of. And for everybody who attended today, if you're willing, please do a very, very brief survey of today's session. And if you choose to submit your email address, you will have a chance to win a year subscription of Trend Micro Maximum Security, which will protect up to 5 devices in your home. It's a great product, of course, from Trend. And so please do. But even so, if you don't want to give your email, we'd love the feedback, of course.
So can I add one thing too, Lynette? And that is that for those whose questions didn't get answered, to remind them about Ask the Mediatrician, the online advice column and podcast we have. It's at askthemediatrician.org. So you can send your questions directly to me, and we will answer them in a science-based, reasonable, and sometimes fun way.
Fantastic. And we will provide all of the links that we discussed today on internetsafety.trendmicro.com/webinars. Thank you again, Dr. Rich, for joining. This was a fantastic conversation. And I think, it'd be great to do this again with you when we're on the other side of COVID-19 and see how life has changed for people and what kids' relationships are like with screens. As you say, I'm really hoping they finally say, I've had enough of this and I need to go run around outside. I need to go see my friends and just talk with them with no screens involved.
Right.
Really hoping that's how it ends.
Yes. Well, we can work toward it.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks again, everybody, for staying with us today, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.